Solidarity Conference. Delighted to see all of you here today. We've got our first discussion of the day is basically the slogan of it is another world is possible, another Ireland is possible. And I think we have this slogan in the context of the multiple crises that we're facing both here at home and internationally. We're seeing in Palestine the escalation of what's been a genocide in Gaza, but now escalation of the war by Israel into Lebanon, bombing Syria, bombing Yemen, bombing the West Bank as well, obviously facilitated by its allies in the US and the EU, and arms being allowed to be flown through Irish airspace to do that. We've seen the growth of the far right internationally and at home as well. So we'll be talking about the need to tackle that and the growth of racism as well. And obviously the backdrop, the big crisis that isn't going away, even if it's not being talked about as much, is the climate crisis and the ongoing environmental catastrophe that we're facing. And here at home, I think we're in a situation where we have massive amounts of money. We've had 8 billion surpluses every year for the last few years. We have an additional windfall of the Apple tax of over 13 billion that the Irish government fought tooth and nail to avoid taking, and now that we have. And we have a budget, basically, where the Irish government talks about a giveaway budget, but it's again another giveaway budget for the extremely wealthy, while ordinary people, the small increases that we're being given are being gobbled up by the increase in the cost of living. So this will be some of the things that we're talking about. We have a resolution at the end of the session that I'll put to the floor to be voted on. But I'll call on our first speaker in this session, who is Richard Burgard, TD for profit from Clonee. Thanks.
Thanks very much, and welcome to this People for Profit Solidarity conference as we face into an imminent general election. And I just want to start with really the quite stunning fact and epic fail of this government in the recent budget, where in possession of absolutely unprecedented billions, a record budget surplus of €25 billion, 13 billion in Apple tax money, they have managed to deliver a budget that, apart from a few one-off payments that will be forgotten by the spring of next year, they have delivered a budget that will do absolutely nothing to address the existential homelessness and housing crisis that is blighting the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in this country. They have done absolutely nothing to address the disastrous situation of understaffing and under-resourcing in our crisis-ridden health service. They have incredibly managed to deliver a budget where, according to the ESRI, the poorest and most vulnerable in our society, including those with special needs and disability, will actually be poorer, and where the vast majority of working people who are struggling to survive, to pay the bills, to pay the rent, to pay their mortgages, are going to be left virtually no better off. And really, the Apple tax issue is emblematic of the fact that this fail, with all of these resources, failing on housing, failing on health, failing on addressing poverty, failing to give working people a break, is not a coincidence. It is to do with the priorities of the government that think the staggering wealth of corporations like Apple are more important than protecting the vulnerable in society, than eliminating poverty, than putting a secure, affordable roof over the heads of ordinary people, or providing the sort of healthcare necessary for people when they are sick, when they are vulnerable, and when they are old. This government, at every hand's turn, shows that for them, the interests of the vulture funds, of the property speculators, of the big multinational corporations, of the very wealthy, of the private health insurance companies, the profiteering energy companies are more important to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael than the lives and livelihoods of ordinary working people in this country and the vulnerable and the disadvantaged. That is what this budget tells us. That is what the Apple scandal tells us. Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and the people propping them up in the Green Party put the interests of the few before the needs of the many. And we are the exact opposite to that. For us, we want to offer an alternative to people as we head towards this election that puts the interests of the many before the few. And if you do that, we can see, with the Apple billions, with the absolutely extraordinary budget surplus, and with the absolutely staggering increase in profits of the corporations, that the resources are there to provide everybody with a secure, affordable roof, to have a decent health service, to provide free childcare, to look after those with special needs, with disability, to eliminate poverty, and to give working people a break. It doesn't happen because this government, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, always put the interests of the wealthy and the corporations and the few first. Whereas we want to offer an alternative which is about redistributing the enormous, unprecedented wealth that exists in our society to ensure that people do have a secure and affordable roof over their head, that they do have a decent, properly resourced, properly staffed health service, that we do have free access to childcare, that we remove all of the financial and other barriers to education, and particularly to higher education. All of these things can be done if there is a political will to address the staggering inequality in our society. We could, as we propose in our alternative budget, with the Apple billions, provide the capital to establish a state construction company to double the output of social and affordable housing, to actually open up the prospect of eliminating the scandal of more than 14,000 people, more than 4,000 children being in emergency accommodation, to deal with the fact that more than 100,000 families are waiting a decade or more on social housing lists, that young working people have not got a prayer of being able to pay the extortionate rents or the extortionate house prices that are being charged by people who are profiteering from the housing crisis, the vulture funds and the corporate landlords, or to address the scandal in the health service. I heard Stephen Donnelly this morning defending the effective staff embargo that has been imposed on the health service. It's absolutely shocking. The government are deceiving the public about the reasons for the crisis in our health service. They told us in July of this year they were lifting the recruitment embargo, but what they didn't say is simultaneously they imposed staff quotas ceilings on the staffing of our health services a month before that, and are continuing to maintain and defend those to the point that our health services, both in the hospitals, in terms of our community health services, in terms of our CAMS teams, child and disability networks, are understaffed because the government is imposing a staff ceiling and embargo to the point that we have unsafe staffing levels across the health service, and nearly 1 million people are on waiting lists waiting for vital procedures. And Stephen Donnelly, in justifying this, was saying things like, well, we couldn't have a situation where the hospitals just decide to recruit people based on whatever they want. Well, that's precisely what does need to happen. We precisely need our doctors and our nurses and our health workers and the patients who rely on those health services to determine what resources, what funding, what staffing is provided for our health services, so that at an absolute minimum we have safe, and that's all the health unions who are out protesting this week are saying, we just want independently verified, safe staffing levels in our health service. Surely with these unprecedented billions, that's not much to ask for. Interestingly, when Stephen Donnelly was justifying this indefensible position, he also mentioned schools. And said we couldn't have a situation where willy-nilly schools were recruiting people, when that is precisely what we need. We need to trust schools, teachers, parents and school communities to say what they need in terms of teachers, teacher-staff ratios and critically special education teachers and SNAs and all the other resources and supports necessary to ensure equality for our children and a decent education and the best start in life. And similarly, for working people, apart from a few once-off crumbs, nothing to give back on the despised, rightly despised, universal social charge. A brutal austerity tax that was imposed supposedly as a once-off emergency measure to deal with a financial crisis that had been caused by the bankers and the developers, but that they still refuse to get rid of. As we said in our alternative budget, we can give hundreds of thousands of working people a break by scrapping the universal social charge and paying for it with a wealth tax. A relatively modest wealth tax where the multi-millionaires in this country would pay a little bit more tax so that working people actually are rewarded for their work and have a chance of being able to pay their rents and pay their mortgages and pay their bills. These are things that can be done. Or the elimination of poverty. Shock even the ESRI, forced to acknowledge the point that they could have, with all of these resources, eliminated poverty in the budget. 700,000 people living on or below the poverty line, and yet we have these countless billions not used to eliminate poverty, to raise everybody in this country out of the poverty trap, and to give acknowledgement to people with disability and special needs of the extra cost they incur because of their special needs and disability, and indeed to remove the means test for carers, an absolutely obnoxious attempt to deny people who do such a service to the vulnerable in our society and to our society as a whole, to lift them out of the poverty trap that the means tests impose on them. Lastly, I want to just mention on the international context what we are witnessing over the last year in Palestine, and now Israel threatening to do the same in Lebanon is absolutely horrific. And the fact that the world, and the Western world in particular, including our government, a year on, continues to fail to act to stop this genocidal massacre and barbarism by a state that has been built on ethnic cleansing, on occupation and apartheid, brings shame on the entire system and international political establishment. But all of that horror that is being perpetrated by Israel in Gaza, on the West Bank and in Lebanon could only happen because of the enabling of the United States, of Western governments, the European Union, and the weapons they allow and supply to that regime to commit these horrors and atrocities. They could end this if they stop the flow of arms and the political impunity that is given to Israel to carry out these war crimes year after year, decade after decade. All of this could have been avoided if they acknowledged the apartheid nature of the regime, the illegality of the occupation, of the siege of Gaza, and ended the flow of weapons, arms and political support to the regime that is perpetrating these horrors. And our government is complicit and deeply implicated in that, despite the fact that they say rhetorically they are concerned about the plight of the Palestinians because they continue to allow the US military, who are up to their necks in this horror, to use Shannon Airport, to allow Israeli munitions through Irish airspace and very likely through Irish airports to commit these crimes. Will Simon Harris, when he goes to New York next week to meet Joe Biden, will he say publicly, as he should, you are complicit with the genocide in Gaza and now the reign of death in Lebanon because you continue to provide this regime for weapons and arms? Stop doing it, and we're going to stop allowing them to bring those weapons and arms through this country. Of course he won't. Of course he won't. But that's what we should do. So comrades, I'll conclude by saying this. Some people want to say that the outcome of this election is a foregone conclusion, that there's an inevitable return to power of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. But that does not have to be the case. We want to offer a clear alternative. And Solidarity and People Before Profit are unique in saying we believe and we are fighting for a genuinely left government that will rule out doing any deal to prop up Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. We appeal to others on the left to do that as well. That is possible and it is necessary when you look at the gross inequality that people are facing, or indeed the complicity of our government with the horrors that Israel is perpetrating in Palestine. But it requires a political will and political principles to say we will not sell our political souls just to get into government with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, but that we are going to offer a genuine left alternative that will always stand with working people, will always stand with the vulnerable, that will always stand with the oppressed. And we invite others on the left to join us in that project and offer people a genuine alternative come this election. And to use our position as elected representatives, not just to make speeches in Parliament, but to build movements supporting the health workers, mobilising the protest in solidarity with Palestine and Lebanon, standing with the families with additional needs in fighting for the resources that they deserve. That's what's different about People Before Profit. We are about action and words and holding to our political principles. So let's go out and fight for those principles in the forthcoming general election.
We have one more speaker from the top table here before we go to the floor. We'll take speakers from the floor. So I'm going to invite Ruth Coppinger, Councillor for Castleknock from Solidarity, and a member of the Socialist Party as well to speak. Thanks, Ruth.
Eva Johnson, Patrick Murphy, Gary Crowley, just 3 young people in the last week who we've heard have died in A&E departments around the country. Not on beds, sometimes not even on a trolley, but often on a chair. And the common denominator with all of them was the fact that the A&Es were massively understaffed and staff just either missed or couldn't get to them. This is in a country with a record budget surplus. That Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green Party have been aware of the chronic problems in our health system. So, one-off budget measures have been given. They'll very quickly be spent, but the fundamental issues facing this country, the chaos of our public services, remain. People needed real change, not spare change. The government decided, however, that the biggest need in our education system right now is pouches. Pouches so that young people can put their phones in. By the way, young people who weren't given laptops during the pandemic when I was teaching during COVID had to rely on their phones. However else would they be able to do the projects that are given to them, by the way. So the government has decided that this is the biggest need, 9 million on pouches. They gave, by the way, 9 million for pouches and 7.9 million for new initiatives on gender-based violence. That's how they view the order of importance. And by the way, they gave 99 million to the cruel and ailing greyhound and racehorse industry that abuses animals on a regular basis. So from the Children's Hospital to the bike sheds, it just seems that this government loves handing large amounts of money to private companies. The chronic underfunding of health and our public services comes at a time where we see children with scoliosis either being left without operations, or now it seems will be paid for to go to the US rather than developing that expertise here in Ireland. 4,000 children in emergency accommodation and thousands more in poverty. And of course the scandal right now that we've seen of neurodivergent children, autistic, disabled or people with additional needs denied their human rights, the right to an education, the right to an actual assessment. In Dublin West we have waiting lists of 7.5 years for the CDNTTs. That's in a constituency with a former Taoiseach and 2 government ministers, 1 for children. So we have a government that's willing to hoard huge amounts of wealth while denying and starving our public services. And we see young people being forced out generally to Australia because of unaffordable housing. And we have to say the failure to deal with the housing crisis for the last decade is giving oxygen to the far right and to racists. It would be much less of an issue and a ground for them to develop if the housing crisis had been addressed. There's 2 women that I'm in touch with in my own area. One has cancer, one has leukemia, and they're both facing eviction. That's the actual reality of the housing crisis now. The far right are also abusing the issue of gender-based violence, which they use to whip up, some of the most racist tropes in communities. And they are an issue, by the way, this government pays a lip service to with their zero tolerance, but they're demonising refugee men, black and brown men, most ignorant and dangerous ploy. But we know from the 40,000 disclosures to Women's Aid and the epidemic of gender-based violence that we've seen, that most men who carry out these crimes are well known to the women who are the victims and survivors. And the rise in misogyny that we have seen, as was highlighted so brilliantly by Natasha O'Brien recently and by many other women who are now coming forward. And we need a movement on the issue of gender violence. But we also have to raise a warning, because the far right-wing independents and parties like N2 have their sights set on women's rights. They want to take away abortion rights. That was the whole raison d'etre of N2 in the first place, which they're now concealing. The first thing the far right said when they got elected was that women weren't breeding enough. Apparently we have a fertility crisis in the country. This is at the root, and we must point that out when we campaign in the elections. So capitalism as a system has multiple crises worldwide right now. And it is consciously stoking up division, stoking up hate, and stoking up fear. Racism, misogyny, homophobia, and of course transphobia. It's a worldwide phenomenon. We see it in the US, we see it in Ireland, and where the world is becoming more divided, more brutal, more violent. Nowhere is this seen more than in Gaza, where more children have been killed in the last year than in any conflict for decades, according to Oxfam. Greta Thunberg, most best-known environmental climate young campaigner, made the point to stand with Palestine is to be human. She has drawn the conclusion from the climate emergency to capitalism, to colonialism, and is linking all the struggles together. And we have to do the same when we campaign in this election. We must draw the link for people that we meet who are now becoming active in different struggles and different campaigns. The crisis is caused by the market, it's caused by capitalism, That is what is creating the massive wealth inequality. So the Irish bank profits in 2022 of 5 billion. The number of people who have wealth in Ireland of over 50 million has doubled. And of course, the figures are off the charts globally, where 8 men now control the same wealth as half the planet. That is how we've never seen such inequality and such disparity of wealth. Now, yesterday in Ireland and around the world, we saw a massive march in the streets of Dublin for Palestine and to stop the invasion of Lebanon and the attacks in Lebanon that are taking place. It is extremely positive that millions of people worldwide are rising up against their own leaders and demanding a different world. A world where war, bloodshed, colonialism and barbarism isn't the norm as this world is. We have to say that a socialist alternative is absolutely vital to what's going on. We have to use the general election to show what kind of change is needed. Unfortunately, Sinn Féin have cozied up to business rather than using the huge mandate that they were given in the last election. They've also bowed to anti-refugee sentiment, and also they're throwing trans people under the bus in the north right now, which is extremely unfortunate. We need to really stand in solidarity against the system. We need to unite all of these struggles, everybody who is facing oppression, working class people, women, people of colour, and so on. Social Party members are very proud to be part of a united left stance in the elections and building a major new movement for change from below, which is what People for Profit and Solidarity represents. And let's stand in solidarity with our siblings in struggle worldwide, around the world, for the Palestinian cause and for a change in the global order in general. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ruth. So we'll take speakers from the floor now. So if people want to raise their hands, and I'll stay up here. I'm going to invite Mario to take that seat there, and I'll just stay here. And if you want to speak, you can speak just in front of the podium here. If that's okay. So I'll start with Brian and move on here.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks very much. One thing I'm always struck with is when Fine Gael first took office. 1 in 5 people with disabilities was living in poverty. Social Justice Ireland came out with a report this week, and it's now half and half. So 50% of people with disabilities live in poverty. It was 20%, it's now 50%. That's the legacy of Fine Gael. That's the legacy that Fine Gael has handed to the community of disability, the most vulnerable. And I don't like using that word, but it's the truth. The most vulnerable in Irish society. And they go nowhere to addressing it. None of the parties on the right go anywhere near addressing it. You have organisations coming out now who would never have dreamed of castigating the state or attacking the government, but the Ombudsman for Children, the Ombudsman, the Disability Federation, Inclusion Ireland, all these organisations coming out saying this can't continue. This is a catastrophic situation on the island of Ireland and it has to stop. But yet there's no appetite from the government, none whatsoever. And I'm reminded of 3 years ago, due to a tweet that I did, a certain junior minister had been very aggrieved and wanted a meeting. We met with her, myself and Sean O'Kelly, young Sean who does the disability activism. And towards the end of this conversation, where we were in a bit of trouble seemingly, when we put it to her that the PUP was €350, the minimum needed to survive, she finished with, "It's a very good point, but it will cost too much money." And this was a woman who champions Family Carers Ireland, who believes she's a voice for that community. It can't continue. I have families coming to my house daily now looking for help. I'm not elected. I'm trying to make a difference. But these are young families with children in the most impoverished areas of Dublin, of Meath, of Cork, Limerick, Kerry, who just have no hope whatsoever. None whatsoever. We offered them that hope. We were the only party to come out in a budget to meet the €350 minimum needed to survive. We are the only party who are addressing the policy that's on government.ie that people with disabilities need €8,500 to €12,500 extra just to stand still on the island of Ireland. We're the only party who have put forward proposals on that. Continually the state fails us, continually the state leaves the most vulnerable behind. We are the ones advocating, champion, to the fore on this issue now. Additional needs classes. We've got 11,000 kids waiting on assessments of needs. It will never be met. It's decades away. We put forward policies and proposals that can meet those failings. And I'll just leave this with you. The budget came out, and all the commentators, very difficult was on them to come out and say that people for profit put forward the best proposals of the budget, the most socially progressive proposals. And every one of them had to say that. And it's a testament to our politics, to the activism. The people in this room have worked so hard to try to give a voice to people that don't have a voice. I'm proud to be a part of this party. I'm proud to say we're championing the disability and caring cause. I'm proud to say when I go into communities and those communities are on their knees with housing and healthcare, they're looking to us and they're saying, please keep up the good work. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Harper Sheehan from the Socialist Party. Just want to speak briefly about trans healthcare as part of the fight for a better world. Ireland currently has the worst trans healthcare in Europe, and what exists, what's on offer, is frankly criminal. People are asked invasive questions about their sex lives, questions about childhood abuse, trauma, as if, trans identities need to be pathologized, as if there's something we need to eradicate. They force people out of the closet, basically making them present as trans in the world before they can have access to gender-affirming care. And in this time when the far right is pushing such a dangerous transphobic rhetoric, this puts people in harm's way. They're saying trans people are responsible for violence against women in the same way they're scapegoating migrants. And let me just say, as a cis woman myself, people espousing transphobia and racism are the ones that I'm fearful to be around. There's humiliating things asked. There's a degrading tone taken towards trans people or gender non-conforming people attempting to access healthcare through the NGS. I heard a story recently of a young person trying to get access to estrogen, who the doctor said after they were out in public for a year with a lot of abuse that they faced that, I couldn't imagine you in a dress. Horrendous, ridiculing, despicable stuff. Paul Moore, who is a prominent doctor with the National Gender Service, we know is involved in the transphobic cast report in Britain. These are the people that are responsible for giving young people, all people who need gender-affirming care, that essential health care. It's unacceptable. Ruth mentioned the attack on puberty blockers in the north. I just want to say clearly that this is a politically motivated choice. There is absolutely no research that says puberty blockers is dangerous to young people, and it's already criminally inaccessible. So you're basically attacking a handful of young people who are able to get all access to puberty blockers. People who a recent Belong To survey showed that 77% of young LGBTQ plus people in the South have suicidal ideations. These are the people you're attacking when you refuse to give them gender-affirming care. It's so incredibly heinous. We know, I'm from the US, and we know that when you siphon off certain healthcare like abortion into separate facilities, if it's not integrated into the health system, it makes it easier to be under attack from the right wing. Trans healthcare, gender-affirming care, can't just be off in these separate gender clinics, even if it is better funded. It has to be fully integrated into a public healthcare system that's democratically run and operated. And we know from the stories that people here have told of criminal treatment of young children with scoliosis, the treatment of disabled people, that like our rights as cis people and the rights of trans people trying to access gender-affirming care are not separate, that actually they should be combined into a collective fight for a public health care system free at the point of use that's democratically run and operated, and that all people, from children with scoliosis to people who need abortion to people seeking life-saving gender-affirming care have access to. So I just want to say that. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. Both Richard and Ruth talked about the health service, and that despite the government claiming they're putting record billions into the health service, there's actually cuts going on. Our patients are being put at risk because there's an embargo on recruitment. So they can say that they're putting record billions in, but actually it only keeps us in line with demographic changes. And across the hospitals in the country, staff are reporting to, the staff in Dunleary came to myself and Richard in St. Michael's Hospital to say that patients are at risk in that hospital. And they're worried about the future of the hospital, because if patients are at risk, slowly but surely downgrades the service altogether, and it becomes inevitable that it's at risk as a hospital itself. We had an amazing public meeting during the week. Over 100 people turned up. Staff from the hospitals, not only from St. Michael's, but also Loughlinstown Hospital, St. Luke's Hospital, Vincent's Hospital, and the community of Dunleary. And we absolutely have to be out there supporting the nurses who are, and the rest of the health workers who are balloting for strike action. But we need to build support in the community. People love their hospitals, their local hospitals. They really value their health service. And we need to make sure that when the nurses are out, or even when the nurses aren't out protesting, that the community is pulling together and defending our health services. The lies of this budget have to be exposed. They're downgrading the health service all across the country, and people, as Ruth said, are dying. So I think, as well as the challenge of the election ahead of us, we need to build the movements of people power. About 15 years ago, they tried to shut St. Michael's altogether. They wanted to sell it off to a private developer. And the people of Dunleary and the staff in the hospital came out and marched through Dunleary, and we forced them to actually invest in the A&E there and build it up to a better A&E. Now it's under attack again. This is happening all across the country, and we need to get out and defend our health services.
So we got our speakers to keep contributions to 2-3 minutes, and then.
Hi, I'm Kay Keane, and I'd just like to mention within the health service, they talk repeatedly about increasing the budget for mental health. I mean, they don't increase the budget for mental health. They issue big numbers, but mental health is standing still. That's evident by the amount of young people, children, that are trying to get appointments with CAMHS. They're waiting on waiting lists for over 18 months just to be assessed. The amount of families that are impacted by children and teens waiting to be assessed for mental health is, in my opinion, absolutely disgusting. And it is the fault of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. We have had over 100 years of these two parties. And if people cannot see how they will only support the wealthy, I don't understand that. We have a housing crisis, we have record homeless figures, we have people waiting on appointments for hospitals, we have people that are sleeping rough because there's nowhere for them to go. And you have Simon Harris making a statement, sure, the housing crisis, the homeless crisis is all because of immigration. Absolutely bull. Blame everyone except take responsibility. And if I hear once more, lessons will be learned, I will scream. Literally scream and pull my hair out, because lessons have not been learned and will never be learned. And as a socialist, I want people out on the street. I want campaigns. I want housing for all. I want healthcare for all. I want access to mental health services for everybody. Not just those that can afford it, for everybody. So I would encourage people, get out on the streets, get local, start campaigns, but we need to get active, because socialism is about activism, and that's what we need to do.
We have two more speakers. Do you want to speak? Oh, okay, just maybe one more, any more after that? Okay, so we'll take Dave, and then we'll go back to Ruth and Richard at the end. So.
Hi, Dave Larkin from Tallaght. Just a quick question for Ruth. Ruth, would you kindly disclose the 3 A&E hospitals that the people died in the last week? I have a great interest in that area. And I will just mention about Tallaght Hospital. The nurses and doctors worked tirelessly for the patients that I witnessed in Tallaght Hospital. I witnessed nurses who were finished their shift, 2 in particular, who went down to a room to write up the reports on the patients that they looked after that day. When nurses go in to the hospital at 8 o'clock in the morning, they are met by doctors. They are met by consultants. They have to give out medication to the patients. The consultant is calling them to go around the patients. When that is happening, patients are calling on nurses for injections or various other problems that they may have. Some of them may have been even dying when they were going from the consultant to the patient. The nurses are really exhausted. And I witnessed that first hand myself in Tallaght Hospital. No matter what hour of the day or night, I was in there. I witnessed that happening. We depend on our nurses. We need our nurses and doctors. Either white, black, green, yellow, whatever colour. We need them. And they were the ones who looked after me when I needed them. Thank you.
So we're running slightly behind time here. I'm going to invite our last 2 speakers back before we take a vote on our resolution. I think Richard or Ruth wants to. Richard, okay, so just for 2 minutes.
Sure. I was on the phone this week in the context of a meeting that we organised in O'Leary about the hospital. Other health workers started to contact me, and one of the groups that contacted me were radiotherapists in St. Luke's Hospital, the cancer hospital. And you think about cancer, it's a life-threatening condition where the question of the timeline for your treatment is a life and death matter. The radiotherapist told me that because of this pay and numbers strategy that has been imposed by the government, machines that are critical to the diagnosis and the treatment of cancer are sitting idle in St. Luke's, and they are not allowed to recruit people to operate those machines. Consequently, people are missing their deadlines for life-saving treatment. And she told me that this is repeated in Galway and in Cork, where more machines, scanners, and other life-saving machinery, where there's been major capital investment in actually providing this machinery, is sitting idle because Stephen Donnelly and the government have decided to impose a staff ceiling called the pay and numbers strategy. So the government are speaking out of both sides of their mouth when they say they're putting record money into the health service. In actuality, they are preventing hospitals from recruiting the people necessary to save the lives of people with cancer, to provide the OTs and the psychologists, the other allied health professionals for our children who need assessment and therapies, from the public health nurses. In my area alone, the representative of the INMO told me that as a result of the pay and number strategy, which means that any post that was not filled in December of last year is suppressed. 11 public health nurse posts just in my CHO area were suppressed as a result, disappeared, ceased to exist. And this is being repeated all over the country when we have an absolute crisis of people waiting for basic treatments, for assessments, to help our children or to help people survive a life-threatening disease. Meanwhile, the private health insurance companies are ramping up their premiums. There are people making money out of this two-tier system because if the state does not provide the resources and staffing for a public health system that actually delivers, people are driven towards the profiteering private health companies. To my mind, that is a deliberate strategy that is being pursued by this government. It is always profit before people. It's the same with the refusal to impose rent controls or to stop the mass eviction of people into homelessness. Or to deliver the social and affordable housing, we need the most basic thing to put a secure, affordable roof over the head of people, because there are some people making money out of it, and then even worse, the government will try and point the finger at immigrants and refugees and say it is them to blame, rather than a government that has the resources but refuses to put them into the housing and the health service that ordinary, decent people need. Their priorities are rotten. So when we go out and campaign in this election, we have to be the ones who are absolutely clear. Another Ireland and another world is possible, where working people get a decent deal, where we get the public services that we need, but that can only happen if we end 100 years' rule of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and offer a genuine left alternative that stands with working people, that stands with the disadvantaged, with the vulnerable, with the discriminated against, and indeed stands with the suffering people of Gaza being murdered with bombs transported through this country provided by the United States of America. That alternative world is possible, but we have to get out and fight to make it a reality.
Just for a couple of minutes to sum up, and then we'll take our resolution, and then there'll be a break then for photographs for the next session.
So, just in relation to the question about where did those 3 people die, so the inquests took place in the last week of those 3 people. That's how we've heard of them now. Obviously, it takes a number of years before we hear these things. So, Patrick Murphy died in 2021 in Cork University Hospital. Gary Crowley died in Tallaght Hospital in 2021, and Eva Johnson, as we know, died in 2022 in Limerick. So, they're all under 35. You know, there was plenty of other people we could have highlighted, and I think we have to highlight the fact that they boast, as I heard Stephen Donnelly on the radio before I came in, about how much they spend on the health service. How much of that is paying agency nurses? How much of that is paying for private companies to do so much of the public work? An absolutely massive amount. Because they can't retain nurses, they can't retain teachers, they can't retain therapists. That's why we have the waiting lists in the CDNTs. That's why we can't get, subjects dropped in schools, etc. I want to say one other thing as well, because Simon Harris is now talking about this wonderful public childcare system that he's trying to establish. Simon has stolen my clothes, because I was talking for a long time about the public preschool system provided in the same way as a primary and secondary school should be provided. And now Simon Harris is saying the same thing. And I have every faith that Simon will do it, because he promised Sláinte Care was set up many years ago, and we haven't heard a peep about it since. And I guarantee to people you won't hear a peep about the public childcare system either, and we need to tell them that. Last thing I want to say is why socialists in the Dáil, because this is what we need to convince people of on the doors. So we have the growth of the far right, we have the growth of racism, misogyny, division. You just have to look at the world. There's something rotten, in this system. Socialists in the Dáil would organise movements, defend people's rights, and obviously challenge the establishment. We may not get change from voting. We very rarely do get change from voting, to be frank. But we will need socialists in the Dáil to organise, as we did with repeal, as we did with a handful of TDs on water charges, and on so many other movements that we're helping with now. That's the point of having socialists in the Dáil.
Thanks very much, Ruth. So, thanks everyone for the discussion. We're going to move to a resolution. It's a lengthy resolution. You probably have it in front of you. I'll just breeze through it quickly. Just some of the key points. So, notes multiple crises facing the capitalist system and its failure to meet the needs of working people in Ireland and globally. It notes in particular growing inequality, whereby a small elite are accruing great wealth, while many working people struggle to survive a cost of living crisis caused in the main by the profiteering of large corporations. Throughout the globe, the share of national wealth going to profits has increased. The failure to provide working people with basic services such as housing, education, healthcare and childcare free at the point of delivery. It notes the failure to deliver the cuts in emission necessary to save our planet and keep warming below 1.5 degrees. And it notes the rise of the far right and the shift to the centre to the right. The conference agrees that another world is possible. The resources exist to make another world possible, but the political will is missing to take the necessary actions to do so. Among the measures necessary in order to make another Ireland possible, this conference calls for a programme to tax the wealthy and corporations, deliver the resources we need to give working people a break. We need to abolish the USC, introduce a living wage for all, end poverty levels of social welfare and pensions, and introduce price controls. We need a state-led programme to build houses, bring vacant homes back into use and retrofit homes. We need a single-tier healthcare system and to take private hospitals and other healthcare facilities into public ownership. A significant investment in services for those with disabilities and special needs. The end of all charges for health, childcare and education. To bring church-controlled facilities into public ownership. A programme to achieve at least a cut of 10% per annum in emissions. We need free and frequent public transport, a state-led programme for retrofitting homes, and a cut in the national herd for large farmers. We need the democratic public ownership of the energy system to drive the transition to renewables and restoration of the not-for-profit mandate of the ESB. And we need the democratic public ownership of the banking system. The conference agrees to continue to build people power movements on these issues. It agrees to continue to oppose the far right and the rise of racism and resist the narrative that Ireland is full. And it also agrees to provide voters with a radical socialist alternative to the failed policies of the establishing parties at the next general election. So that's the resolution. So people, I'm just going to take for and against, if that's okay. People can raise their arms. That's probably uncontroversial, I imagine, but given that we work on solidarity conference. So yeah, very good. Anyone against? Okay, so that resolution is passed. Thanks very much. We're going to break now for. So we're going to just take a break here for photographs before we start the next session. So we're running slightly behind time, but we'll be catching the next session. Thank you. How long is the break?